West Pittston, Pennsylvania appeared on no map of the supernatural, held no ancient curse in local legend, and offered no warning to the family who moved into a quiet duplex on Chase Street in 1973 that their lives were about to become a battlefield between the living and something that refused to stay buried in darkness. Jack and Janet Smurl wanted nothing more than an ordinary American life, a safe place to raise their 4 daughters Dawn, Carla, Shannon, and Heather, with Jack's parents living peacefully in the other half of the duplex they shared. For over a decade, that dream held. The children grew, birthdays were celebrated, dinners were shared, and the rhythm of family life continued without interruption. Then in 1985, something fundamental shifted in that home, and what began as minor oddities transformed with horrifying speed into one of the most violent and prolonged cases of demonic assault ever documented on American soil. A nightmare that would not end even when the family fled hundreds of miles into the wilderness. The beginning was subtle, almost dismissible. Strange smells drifted through the rooms with no identifiable source, faint at first, then stronger, carrying the unmistakable scent of decay. Mysterious stains appeared on carpets and walls, dark and oily, scrubbed away only to return the next morning in the exact same locations. Appliances began operating on their own, televisions switching channels, radios blaring static in the dead of night, the kitchen stove igniting its burners when no one was near. Jack initially suspected electrical problems, perhaps faulty wiring in the aging duplex. He called electricians who found nothing wrong. Janet wondered if the plumbing was leaking somewhere hidden, causing the stains and smells. Plumbers inspected every pipe and pronounced the system sound. The rational explanations crumbled one by one, and the family began to realize they were dealing with something that defied logic. Then, the violence began. The family's German Shepherd, a strong and healthy animal, was suddenly hurled across the living room by an invisible force with such power that the dog's bones cracked audibly on impact against the far wall. The animal survived, but was never the same, cowering in corners and refusing to enter certain rooms. A black humanoid shadow began appearing in the house, not a trick of light or the absence of illumination, but a figure darker than the surrounding darkness, a shape that moved with deliberate purpose and intelligence. Family members watched in frozen terror as this shadow figure walked through the living room, paused as if observing them, then passed directly through solid walls as though they were nothing more than illusion. Janet woke one night to the sensation of hands gripping her ankles, and before she could scream, she was dragged from her bed by unseen forces, pulled across the floor as scratch marks appeared on her arms, thin red lines drawn by fingernails that did not exist in any visible form. Jack suffered an assault of a different nature, one he spoke about only reluctantly, his voice shaking with shame and anger. While he slept, a crushing weight settled on his chest, invisible hands violated him in the darkness, and he felt an intelligence behind the attack, something that wanted not just to harm him, but to humiliate and break his spirit. The temperature in certain rooms plummeted without warning or cause, breath turning to fog even as adjacent spaces remained warm. The smell of decay intensified, joined now by the unmistakable sulfurous stench associated with demonic presence. One of the daughters reported waking repeatedly to find a female entity standing at the foot of her bed, a woman in old-fashioned clothing who smiled without any warmth or humanity, her eyes empty and her presence radiating malevolence. The activity grew more frequent and more violent with each passing week, as if the entity or entities in the house were learning the family's routines, identifying their vulnerabilities, and exploiting every weakness with calculated precision. By 1986, the Smurl family had reached a breaking point. The attacks showed no sign of stopping, the psychological toll was devastating, and the children were suffering trauma that no parent could bear to witness. Through contacts in the Catholic Church and paranormal research community, they made contact with Ed and Lorraine Warren, the renowned demonologists who had investigated some of the most notorious hauntings in American history. When the Warrens arrived at the Chase Street duplex, Lorraine Warren experienced the oppressive atmosphere before she even reached the front door, later describing it as walking into something physical, a heaviness that pressed against her chest and made breathing difficult. Ed Warren conducted his investigation with the methodical care that had made him one of the most respected figures in paranormal research, interviewing each family member separately to avoid contamination of testimony, documenting every reported incident, and spending nights in the house to witness the phenomena firsthand. His conclusion, delivered to the family with solemn gravity, confirmed their worst fears. The duplex contained 4 distinct entities, 3 lower spirits that fed on fear and chaos, and 1 demon that served as the intelligence directing all events. This demon was powerful, deeply entrenched in the location, and demonstrated a level of malevolence that Ed Warren had rarely encountered. He classified the case as an infestation that had progressed to oppression, with early warning signs that possession might be the entity's ultimate goal. The demon was not randomly lashing out, but was executing a deliberate strategy to break the family's will, isolate them from help, and claim them completely. Desperate for relief, the Smurls planned a camping trip, reasoning that whatever tormented them must be tied to the physical structure of the duplex. They drove for hours into the Pennsylvania wilderness, far from Chase Street, and set up their campsite in a peaceful forest clearing where birds sang and sunlight filtered through the trees. That first night, as darkness fell and the family tried to find rest they had not known in months, the familiar smell of sulfur drifted through their tent. The oppressive presence returned with crushing force. Jack was attacked again, suffering the same invisible assault he had endured at home, miles away from the duplex and any place the entity should have been able to reach. The terrible truth became undeniable in that moment. The demon was not bound to the house. It was bound to the family. There was no geography that could provide safety, no distance they could travel to escape, nowhere on earth they could run. When the Smurls made the difficult decision to share their story with the press, hoping that public attention might bring resources and support, the demon reacted with explosive fury. The attacks doubled in intensity and frequency. Objects flew through rooms with violent force. The black shadow figure appeared in broad daylight, no longer confined to darkness. The smell became so overwhelming that neighbors complained. The entity seemed determined to punish the family for speaking out, to demonstrate that it would not be challenged or exposed without exacting a terrible price. The Warrens arranged for Reverend Robert McKenna, a traditionalist Catholic priest experienced in the rite of exorcism, to perform the sacred ritual at the duplex. The first exorcism lasted for hours, the priest invoking the authority of the church against the demonic presence, commanding it to depart in the name of powers it was compelled to obey. The family felt immediate relief when the ritual concluded, the oppressive atmosphere lifted, and for several days they dared to hope their ordeal had ended. Then the entity returned, and they understood they were facing something with the strength and will to resist even the full force of ecclesiastical authority. A second, more intensive exorcism was performed, with Reverend McKenna employing the highest invocations available to the church. Witnesses present during this ritual described temperature drops so severe that frost formed on windows in summer, strange lights that had no source, and the palpable sense of an invisible battle being waged in dimensions beyond human perception. Gradually, over the following weeks, the attacks diminished in frequency and intensity. The demon had not been destroyed. Ed Warren was clear on this point, but it had been forced to loosen its grip. The family could not remain in the duplex. The trauma was too deep and the memories too painful. They eventually moved away from Chase Street and began the long process of rebuilding their lives, though the scars remained and the knowledge of what they had faced never left them. The Smurl haunting became one of the most extensively documented cases in the Warren archive, meticulously recorded and referenced in lectures and publications. Jack and Janet Smurl chose to share their account publicly, co-writing the book The Haunted in 1988 with the Warrens and author Robert Curran, and their story was adapted into a television movie in 1991 that brought their nightmare to a national audience. The duplex on Chase Street was investigated by subsequent researchers in the years that followed, and some reported lingering unusual activity, residual energy from the years of assault, or perhaps something that never fully left. Ed and Lorraine Warren referenced the Smurl case frequently as an example of how demonic entities truly operate, not with spontaneous violence or random attacks, but with patience, strategic intelligence, and a willingness to endure multiple exorcisms while waiting for the moment to reassert dominance. The case demonstrated that demons are not bound by physical space, that they can follow their victims anywhere, and that the battle against such forces requires not just faith and ritual, but extraordinary courage from ordinary people who never asked to become soldiers in a war most people refuse to believe exists. The Smurl family survived their ordeal, but their story remains a testament to the reality that some darkness cannot be explained away, some evil cannot be reasoned with, and some homes should never have been built on ground where something ancient and malevolent waited for the door to be opened. Hashtags Vanishing Roads Documentary Paranormal Ed and Lorraine Warren Demonology Haunted House True Story Supernatural Horror West Pittston, Pennsylvania SM URL Haunting Exorcism Demonic Scary True Crime. This story was created with AI assistance based on documented paranormal case files. All events reference real investigations by Ed and Lorraine Warren.